Welcome. Today's story pulls you into the brutal heart of Mississippi, where a slave boy is punished over something as small as an egg, and a chain of events begins that his master never sees coming. This isn't just a tale meant to shock. It's built on careful digging into real historical conditions, folklore, and documented cruelty of the era, woven into a narrative that asks what power really looks like. As you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you value stories that take serious time, research, and effort to uncover dark truths, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Mississippi plantation life was built on a rigid hierarchy where power flowed in only one direction, and every sunrise reinforced who commanded and who obeyed. Vast fields of cotton stretched endlessly under the burning southern sun, worked by enslaved people whose lives were measured not in years, but in harvests survived. The land looked peaceful from a distance, yet beneath that quiet surface lived a system sustained by fear, hunger, and exhaustion. For enslaved families, each day began before light touched the soil. Bells or shouted orders dragged children and adults alike from overcrowded cabins, their bodies still aching from the day before. Food was scarce and carefully rationed, often spoiled or insufficient, leaving constant hunger as a companion. Even the smallest act to quiet that hunger, like taking an egg, could be treated as a serious crime. Masters ruled with absolute authority, acting as judge, jury, and executioner of punishment. Discipline was public and deliberate, designed not only to hurt the individual but to warn everyone watching. Plantation life depended on obedience, and cruelty was used as a tool to maintain it. Mercy, when it appeared, was unpredictable and often performative. Children grew up learning silence before speech and caution before curiosity. A slave boy on a Mississippi plantation learned early that survival meant staying invisible, never drawing attention, never appearing defiant, even when hunger gnawed at his stomach. Childhood ended early, replaced by labor and fear long before understanding. Nature surrounded the plantations in sharp contrast to human cruelty. Dense forests bordered the fields, alive with unseen movement and sound. Wolves, birds, and hidden creatures watched from the shadows, untouched by the rules that governed human suffering. To the enslaved, the wilderness represented both danger and freedom, a place forbidden yet alive. Plantation owners often believed themselves masters of everything they could see, blind to what existed beyond their fences. They underestimated the land, the animals, and the quiet connections forming outside their control. Their confidence came from routine punishment and unquestioned dominance. In this world, Mississippi plantation life was not just a setting, it was a pressure chamber. Every small action carried weight, every mistake risked pain, and every moment built toward consequences unseen. What seemed like complete control was, in truth, fragile, waiting for something unexpected to shift the balance. Hunger was a constant presence, sharper than pain and more patient than fear. On Mississippi plantations, enslaved people lived with empty stomachs that never truly rested, learning to work long hours on little than cornmeal, scraps, or whatever could be stretched from meager rations. Survival meant enduring that hunger quietly, because complaining only invited punishment, never relief. For a slave boy, hunger was especially cruel. His growing body demanded more than the plantation ever intended to give, and by midday the weakness would creep into his arms and legs. Each step through the fields felt heavier, each command harder to follow, yet slowing down was not an option. Hunger did not excuse missed work, it only made the consequences worse. People learned to become resourceful in secret ways. They memorized which paths led to berry bushes, which trees dropped edible nuts, and which chicken nests were left unattended for a few moments. These acts were not theft in their minds. They were survival. Taking food was often the difference between standing upright and collapsing into the dirt, but survival carried risk. Every stolen bite came with the knowledge that discovery could mean whipping, shackles, or worse. A single egg, small and fragile, could be treated as an unforgivable offense if taken without permission. Masters believed strict control over food, kept obedience intact, using hunger as another chain. Children watched adults make impossible choices and learned from them. They learned when to swallow their desperation and when to take a chance. A slave boy might stare at an egg in his hands, understanding that it meant strength for the day, or pain if caught. Hunger forced decisions no child should ever have to make. Even in moments of shared suffering, survival created quiet bonds. A piece of food slipped into a small hand, a look exchanged without words, a warning whispered at the right time. These were acts of resistance disguised as kindness. Hunger taught people how to rely on one another when the system gave them nothing. In the end, hunger shaped every thought and action. It narrowed the world to what the body needed to keep moving, to stay alive one more day. On Mississippi plantations, survival was not about hope or future freedom. It was about enduring the present, even when that endurance demanded a dangerous choice. The egg was small, warm from the nest, and lighter than it should have felt for something that could change everything. For a slave boy, holding it was like holding a secret. Fragile, precious, and dangerous all at once. It was not taken out of greed, but out of necessity, a quiet answer to the ache twisting inside his stomach since dawn. He had watched the chickens for days, learning their patterns the same way he learned the moods of overseers and masters. Timing mattered. A few seconds too early or too late could mean discovery. When the moment came, his hands moved quickly, almost without thought, driven by hunger rather than choice. The egg represented more than food. It was strength, the promise of making it through another day in the fields without collapsing. It was a reminder that life still existed beyond orders and punishment. In a world where almost everything was denied, the egg felt like something the earth itself had offered. Fear followed immediately. His heart pounded louder than his footsteps as he hid it against his body, every sound suddenly too sharp. He knew the rules well, nothing belonged to him, not even his own hunger. If caught, no explanation would matter. Survival was never considered a reason. Stories of punishment echoed in his mind. He had seen grown men beaten for less, watched children cry until their voices broke. An egg, though small, was treated as defiance. The boy understood that what he carried could cost him pain far greater than the hunger it was meant to ease. Still, he did not drop it. Hunger has a way of silencing fear just long enough for hope to slip in. Maybe no one would notice. Maybe this one time, he could eat and keep working and remain unseen. That thin hope was enough to keep him moving. In that single stolen egg lived a turning point. It was the moment where survival crossed into risk, where a quiet act challenged a brutal system. The boy did not know it yet, but that fragile choice would pull unseen forces into motion, far beyond what any master believed possible. Punishment on the plantation was never just about correcting behavior. It was about reminding everyone who held power. When the master discovered the missing egg, his anger was swift and performative, fueled by the belief that even the smallest disobedience threatened his authority. An example had to be made, especially when the offender was young. The boy was dragged into the open, where others could see. Public punishment was intentional, meant to sink fear deep into every witness. The master's voice carried across the yard, loud and sharp, accusing the child not just of theft, but of disrespect. In that moment, the egg became an excuse, not the reason. There was no trial, no chance to speak. The boy's silence was expected, demanded. His body trembled as hands forced him into place, the ground cold beneath his feet, despite the heat of the day. Pain was treated as instruction, and mercy was considered weakness. Each strike landed with purpose, paced to stretch the suffering. The master watched closely, measuring control through endurance. To him, the punishment was proof of order restored, a reminder that nothing, even hunger, justified crossing the line he had drawn. For those forced to watch, the punishment carved itself into memory. Eyes dropped, jaws tightened, fists clenched in helpless anger. No one intervened, not because they agreed, but because they understood the cost. Fear kept everyone frozen, complicit through survival. The boy learned a brutal lesson that day, not about right or wrong, but about visibility. Being seen was dangerous. Existing too loudly, needing too much, or taking too little mercy could all lead to pain. Punishment taught him to shrink, to disappear within himself. Yet punishment also planted something unintended. Beneath the pain and humiliation, something hardened. The master believed fear was enough to break a spirit, unaware that cruelty often forges resolve. What he saw as control was, in truth, the moment a balance began to shift beyond his sight. Power on the plantation was absolute and unquestioned, designed so that one man's word outweighed the lives of many. The master did not see himself as cruel in his own mind. He saw himself as necessary. Control, to him, was order, and order justified whatever methods were required to maintain it. This imbalance shaped every interaction. A master could decide punishment on a whim, change rules without warning, and demand obedience without explanation. Enslaved people lived under shifting expectations, where survival depended on reading moods rather than laws. Power was not written down, it was felt, daily and deeply. The boy understood this imbalance long before the egg. He knew that no argument could protect him, no truth could save him. His size, his age, his hunger meant nothing against authority backed by force. Power did not need to be reasonable. It only needed to be feared. Those without power learned restraint as a form of defense. They spoke carefully, moved deliberately, and hid emotions that might be mistaken for defiance. Even grief and pain were dangerous if shown too openly. The imbalance demanded silence, and silence became a shield. For the master, power created blindness. Surrounded by obedience, he assumed loyalty. He believed fear equaled control, never considering what grew beneath it. He failed to see the quiet intelligence in the boy's eyes, or the way the land itself seemed to watch and wait. Power also isolated him. While he commanded many, he truly understood none of them. Their inner lives, their fears, and their quiet connections to each other and the world beyond the plantation remained invisible to him. That ignorance felt like safety. In this imbalance, the master stood tall and confident, convinced nothing could challenge him. But power built on domination is fragile. It depends on ignorance of what lies beyond sight, and in that unseen space, forces were already aligning that did not recognize his authority at all. Suffering on the plantation was rarely loud. It lived in lowered eyes, clenched jaws, and breaths held just a second too long. Enslaved people learned quickly that pain shown openly invited more pain, so they carried it inward, letting it settle deep where it could not be punished further. The boy's cries faded fast, swallowed by instinct rather than relief. He learned to endure without sound, to let tears fall only when no one could see. Silence became survival. Every quiet moment was a calculation. How much pain could be hidden, how much weakness could be disguised as obedience. Around him, adults modeled this restraint. They worked with stiff backs and unreadable faces, sharing looks instead of words. Grief, anger, and fear were communicated in glances and pauses, in hands briefly touching before pulling away. Silence was a language the plantation never fully understood. At night, the cabins held what daylight forbade. Pain was acknowledged in whispers, wounds cleaned without complaint, stories told softly to remind children they were still human. Even then, suffering stayed controlled, careful not to spill beyond thin walls. The risk was always there. The boy carried his suffering like a secret weight. Each step, each movement reminded him of what had happened, yet he showed nothing. He learned that the absence of reaction was mistaken for acceptance, and acceptance was rewarded with fewer blows. Silence bought time. This quiet endurance created a strange strength. While the master believed he was breaking spirits, he was training them to endure, to wait, to observe. Suffering sharpened awareness. It taught patience in a world where patience was dangerous, but necessary. In that silence, something endured untouched by punishment. The boy's pain did not vanish, it transformed. It became memory, and memory became resolve. What looked like submission was often something else entirely, something listening closely for the moment, when silence would no longer be required. Nature on the plantation existed in stark contrast to the cruelty of human life. Fields of cotton and corn were bordered by dense forests, swamps, and rivers that seemed untouched by the hierarchy and oppression within the plantation gates. For those who were enslaved, the wilderness represented both danger and freedom, a world where no master's whip could reach. The boy had learned to notice the small signs of life around him. Birds took flight at the slightest sound. The wind whispered through the trees, and shadows moved where no human eyes could follow. Every rustle was a reminder that the world was bigger than the narrow, ordered rows of crops, and that there was a life outside the rules of men. Even in the harshest hours, the natural world offered solace. A stream could provide water and a brief sense of relief. Fruit, bearing trees meant a hidden reward for patience and observation. These small gifts from nature were dangerous too, because taking them without permission risked punishment, but they were also proof that survival could depend on more than obedience alone. The forests surrounding the plantation were alive with predators and allies alike. Wolves, foxes, and other animals watched silently from the shadows, oblivious to human hierarchies but very aware of opportunity. To the boy, these creatures became symbols of strength and vigilance, a reminder that there were forces in the world that did not obey the master's commands. Nature also mirrored human struggle. Storms swept through the fields, lightning split the sky, and floods could undo a week of work in hours. These events reminded the enslaved that, while humans wielded some control, they were never fully masters of their world. Life was unpredictable, and patience, observation, and respect for the environment could be as valuable as any skill in the fields. The boy's connection to nature grew quietly. He observed patterns in animals, learned their hiding places, and even imagined them as allies, silent guardians that moved with him through the shadows. While the plantation sought to dominate, the wild remained free, a hidden force waiting to act. Ultimately, the wilderness was more than a backdrop. It was an active participant in survival. It offered protection, knowledge, and an unspoken power that no human could command. In a world of cruelty and oppression, the natural world stood apart, patient, watching, and ready to shift the balance in ways the master could never anticipate. The giant wolf was unlike any creature the boy had seen before, towering, silent, and watchful. It moved with a patience that mirrored the quiet vigilance the boy had learned to practice himself. While humans were loud with authority and cruelty, the wolf's presence was subtle, almost imperceptible, a shadow waiting at the edges of the plantation. Its eyes, sharp and calculating, followed the master's movements as carefully as the boy had learned to do. Every step, every gesture of anger or command was noted. The wolf did not act immediately, but its very existence was a force, a guardian waiting for the precise moment when action would be most effective. The boy felt its presence without fear. Somehow, instinct recognized the wolf as an ally rather than a threat. It became a silent comfort, a reassurance that he was not entirely alone in a world built to break him. He began to move with more confidence, knowing that someone or something watched over him, ready to intervene if necessary. The master, of course, noticed nothing. Consumed by rage over the stolen egg and the supposed disobedience, he failed to perceive the silent figure lurking nearby. He believed control was absolute, that fear dictated all, and that the world bent entirely to his will. In his arrogance, he ignored the forces he could not see. The wolf's presence introduced an unseen balance. While the master wielded authority through violence, the natural world, embodied by this creature, offered protection and justice beyond human comprehension. It was patience, power, and threat wrapped in fur and shadow, waiting for the precise moment to intervene. As the boy continued to endure punishment, the wolf observed, calculating, never aggressive without reason. Its intelligence suggested understanding, an awareness of human cruelty, and the need for precise timing. In the wilderness of the plantation, this creature represented a different kind of power, one that was patient, lethal, and aligned with the oppressed rather than the oppressor. Ultimately, the giant wolf was more than a guardian. It was a symbol of resistance and inevitability. Where human authority was blind and arrogant, nature and its creatures acted with precision. The master's cruelty could not account for such forces, and the presence of the wolf hinted at the coming moment when the balance of power, long assumed to be absolute, would quietly and irrevocably shift. The wolf remained hidden in the shadows, its presence unnoticed by everyone except the boy. From the edge of the fields, it watched with unwavering focus, its massive body blending into the dark underbrush. Every movement of the master, every shout and strike, was catalogued silently in its mind, as if the creature understood the injustice unfolding before it. The boy, feeling the wolf's eyes upon him, sensed a strange reassurance. In the midst of fear, exhaustion, and pain, the knowledge that a powerful ally was nearby gave him a fragile courage. He could endure the punishment with a steadier heart, knowing that he was not entirely alone in the world of cruelty around him. The master, meanwhile, remained oblivious. His attention was consumed by his own rage and the need to display authority. He believed fear controlled all who worked under him, and that every action reinforced his dominance. Little did he know, the balance of power had quietly shifted beyond his perception, with a silent predator waiting just out of reach. The wolf's patience was deliberate. It did not act out of instinct alone, but with a calculated restraint that suggested understanding. The timing of intervention mattered. It would not move too early to ruin the plan, nor too late to let harm go unchecked. It was a silent force, aligned with the boy, moving with precision through the unseen world of the plantation. From its vantage point, the wolf observed the subtle cues that humans often overlooked. The tightening of fists, the shift of weight before a strike, the tremor of fear in the boy's body. Every detail mattered, and the wolf was ready to respond at the exact moment when justice could be delivered without hesitation. The shadowed presence of the wolf also sent a quiet message to the boy. Even in a world dominated by violence and control, unseen allies exist. Strength can come from patience, from observation, and from forces beyond human understanding. The boy felt a renewed determination to survive, knowing he had a guardian who understood the danger and the right moment to intervene. In the end, the wolf waiting nearby was more than protection. It was a symbol of inevitability. While the master wielded brute force without foresight, the quiet watcher represented precision, timing, and the natural justice that humans could neither command nor predict. Its silent vigilance foreshadowed a moment when the scales would tip, and the consequences of arrogance and cruelty would finally meet the boy's unseen ally. Fear and arrogance intertwined on the plantation, creating a dangerous tension that controlled every movement of those who lived under its rules. The master's arrogance blinded him to consequences beyond his narrow view. He assumed that fear alone guaranteed obedience. Each lash, each shouted order, reinforced his belief that power was absolute, that nothing could challenge his authority. The boy felt the weight of this fear every day. It was a constant presence, pressing down on his chest as he worked under the sun, reminding him that one mistake could lead to pain or worse. But he also learned to recognize the limits of fear. It could protect him when wielded carefully, yet it could never fully shield him from cruelty or injustice. Arrogance made the master predictable. He believed he could control every element of the plantation, from crops to animals to the lives of the enslaved. That predictability was something the boy and the wolf could exploit, quietly watching, waiting for the exact moment when fear could be turned into opportunity. The wolf sensed this imbalance as well. Unlike humans, it did not overestimate its control or underestimate its opponents. It moved with careful calculation, waiting for the moment when the master's arrogance would blind him completely, allowing action to restore a balance he could not even perceive. Fear also created silence among the witnesses. Others on the plantation, watching the punishment over the egg, did not intervene. Their fear was both a shield and a cage, keeping them frozen while injustice unfolded. Arrogance blinded the master to the quiet resentment growing in their hearts, a force as real and patient as the wolf lurking nearby. The boy, guided by instinct and strengthened by unseen support, began to understand the nature of this dynamic. Fear and arrogance were two sides of the same coin. One maintained control, the other revealed vulnerability. Recognizing this allowed him to endure, to anticipate, and to wait for a chance that the master could not see coming. Ultimately, the combination of fear and arrogance ensured that the master remained confident yet unaware. Every act of cruelty reinforced his belief in his own supremacy, even as it set the stage for consequences he could never predict. The silent presence of the wolf and the resilience of the boy hinted at the inevitability of a reckoning, born from the very traits the master trusted to keep him unchallenged. Even in the harshest conditions, the idea of justice lingered quietly among the enslaved, though it existed far beyond the master's understanding. Justice was not measured by the plantation's rules, nor by the punishments meted out by the whip. It was something deeper, a sense of balance that could emerge in unexpected ways. The boy, though young and fearful, sensed that the world had forces that could intervene where human cruelty failed. He noticed small signs of fairness in nature long before the giant wolf appeared. Streams flowed freely, trees grew despite attempts to clear them, and predators survived outside the plantation walls, acting on instinct rather than fear or obedience. This natural order contrasted sharply with the forced hierarchy of human life, hinting that consequences could arise beyond what anyone could control. The boy began to understand that justice was patient. It did not rush or announce itself with sound or spectacle. Instead, it moved silently, gathering strength and watching for the precise moment when it could act effectively. The giant wolf embodied this principle, quiet, observant, and ready to intervene in a way that the master could not anticipate. Even as punishment rained down, the boy felt a sense of moral symmetry forming. The master's cruelty was absolute, yet it carried within it the seeds of vulnerability. His arrogance and reliance on fear blinded him to the forces building around him, leaving gaps where unseen allies could make a difference. Justice, in its truest form, was often invisible until it struck. The other enslaved people around him also embodied a form of justice. Small acts of solidarity, whispered warnings, and subtle protections created a network of resistance. Though they could not openly challenge the master, their quiet interventions reinforced that wrongdoing could be opposed, even when survival depended on silence. Justice, in this context, was as much about timing as it was about action. Too early, and it might fail. Too late, and harm would be done. The boy sensed that both he and the wolf were part of a larger rhythm, a moment when punishment and oppression could be confronted by an unseen balance that the master could never comprehend. Ultimately, justice existed outside the plantation's walls and the master's authority. It was patient, relentless, and precise. Where human systems of control failed, nature and resilience provided a reckoning. The boy, guided by instinct and the watchful presence of the wolf, became part of that inevitability, showing that even in the darkest places, forces of fairness and retribution endure beyond sight. Fate, though invisible and silent, seemed to thread itself through every moment on the plantation. Every decision, every punishment, every small act of defiance contributed to a larger pattern beyond human understanding. The boy could not know it, but the stolen egg, the master's rage, and the patient presence of the wolf were all pieces of a future that was quietly shaping itself. The choices the boy made, born of hunger and survival, carried consequences that reached far beyond that single moment. Each step he took, each glance he cast toward the shadows, was part of a chain reaction. Fate often works quietly, allowing events to unfold naturally until a tipping point arrives, and the world shifts in ways no one could anticipate. Even the master's actions were part of this unseen current. His cruelty, arrogance, and sense of invincibility created conditions for change, though he interpreted them as proof of his dominance. In reality, the more he tried to assert control, the more he wove the threads that would ultimately challenge it. Fate has a way of turning certainty into vulnerability. The wolf's presence was also tied to this inevitability. It was not mere coincidence that the creature waited patiently at the edges of the plantation. Nature, instinct, and timing converged in that massive, silent form, prepared to act precisely when the balance would tip. Fate had placed it there, not as vengeance, but as the natural consequence of the master's hubris. The enslaved community contributed to this unseen design as well. Quiet acts of resistance, shared knowledge, and careful observation all accumulated like hidden currents beneath the surface. While the master believed he controlled everything, these subtle forces were orchestrating outcomes beyond his perception. For the boy, fate was experienced as both peril and protection. Hunger, fear, and suffering collided with instinct and unseen support, guiding him through the moment of greatest danger. Every act, small or significant, was part of a narrative larger than his understanding, yet perfectly aligned to allow survival, resilience, and retribution to emerge. In the end, fate acted as the silent arbiter. It moved invisibly through the fields, the cabins, and the shadows of the forest, aligning the oppressed, the wild, and the events of the day toward an inevitable reckoning. The master could not foresee it, nor could he prevent it. Because fate does not obey human will, it simply ensures that actions, choices, and timing converge until balance is restored.